quickly, like in a pithy way, sum up what it means to be conservative? Because I feel like there's this constant debate about what conservative actually means. I think that the left has its own issues, debating what the word liberal means as well. But what does it mean to be conservative?
I'd say it's a preference for familiar things over strange things, a preference for continuity over change. A friend of mine once said that the opposite of conservative used to be destructive, not instead of liberal. To conserve something versus to destroy something. So it's a preference for continuity over change, and a preference for the permanent things over the passing things. In general, I think our lodestars are guys like Russell Kirk. He was a former editor of Modern Age.
Yeah.
And all of the usual conservative heroes, William F. Buckley and so forth. But
so there's not like an actual fixed policy destination in what you just described. It's more like setting cruise control at a low speed limit.
Yeah, that's right. I think conservatism is a disposition rather than a set of ideas. It's not an ideology. And in fact, if you could describe a conservative in like one phrase, it would be somebody that's opposed to ideology. If ideology gives you hives, you might be a conservative. And so what that means is there is no conservative position on ideal tax rates. We might, based on reason, based on what's happened in the past, decide that taxes should be higher or lower, but there is no conservative position on tax rates. It's a disposition toward looking at social problems.
Gotcha.
That's interesting. So, looking at where so-called conservatives are going these days, would you say that is because it looks like, for example, when we look at the Trump era, it seemed like there was a lot of radical change or reactionary change, I should say. Do you think that that this new era represents a different something different than being conservative or conservatism?
Yeah, that's a great point. During the Trump years, there definitely, among people that were very enthusiastic about Trump, they had a kind of radical sensibility. They cared about radical change. And also, Trump did represent a pretty dramatic shift in policy priorities for the nation, back to protectionism, away from imperialism abroad, things like that. So, the conservatives did care about somewhat radical change. But I would say if I were to make a conservative case for Trumpism, it would be all of these things: protectionism, ending the empire, coming back home and focusing on ourselves for a little while. All of that stuff is about building up the primary goods, which is like the family, home, nation, community. And I think, those policy priorities are all aimed at protecting that set of goods for the family, the community, the nation. So sometimes you have to be radical to preserve those things. But yeah.
It was interesting, especially the Trump years have, I think, provoked a lot of conservatives to take an inventory of what they believe and why, and what the actual threats are to the well-being of the country. So traditionally, we think of conservative thought as thinking as like, oh, well, the big threat is the government itself, that the power concentrated within the government represents an existential threat. So we need to be very careful about how much power we vest, especially at the highest levels of our government. But now it seems like all power centers are open to a lot more scrutiny amongst conservatives. If you are a powerful institution in the United States, you are getting a gaze. Like the public is looking at you, and a lot of conservatives now looking at you. What is changing, do you think, right now? What does that debate look like, and where's it headed?
Well, I went back and read there's been some, conservatives in America are unusual based on, how conservatives are across the world. The focus that conservatives in America have on, for lack of a better phrase, hating the government, that's something you don't always see among conservatives in other countries. But it is very much a quality of conservatives in America. And one of the things that's intensifying, and it's especially intensifying under Joe Biden, is the kind of the national security apparatus increasingly is sort of treating them like enemies. And I went back and read, there's been some new information about the Oklahoma City bombing, and that's to go back to event that was pretty seminal for the 90s. Gore Vidal, the famous writer, novelist, history writer, he had a long magazine essay about his conversations with Timothy McVeigh. And McVeigh was like a super patriot, like a super duper patriot. He almost like if you took your average conservative and made them crazy and violent. But their point of view was similar in a lot of ways. And so Gore Vidal was trying to reckon with the idea: what do people do when they feel like their government has declared war on them? And I think conservatives are now thinking through some of that also because of some of this like domestic national security stuff that's being put in place. There's kind of a siege mentality among conservatives, justified or not, after scandals like the IRS targeting or January 6th or things like that. There's definitely a siege mentality by American conservatives right now, and it makes them open to a lot more radicalism than they might have been in the past.